Under the canopy of ancient trees, where the wind sang soft songs through the palm leaves and the earth smelled of rain and yam, lived a girl named Aduera. Her hands were known throughout the village of Umwala, not for strength or battle, but for healing. When a child burned his foot near the fire, it was Adora's touch that cooled the pain. When an old woman's joints refused to bend, Adora's oils and chants brought relief. She did not speak much, but when she did, it was always gentle and wise beyond her years. She had learned from her mother, who had learned from hers. It was said the women in their bloodline could calm storms and read the eyes of spirits. Adora's life was simple, tucked between laughter and chores. Her mother had soft eyes and strong arms, always singing while grinding spices. Her father, a tall man with a crooked smile, told stories at night about gods and hunters. And then there was Kyra, her younger sister, whose laugh was wild like the wind and whose beauty turned the heads of every boy in the market square. Aduera and Kyra shared secrets under the moon, braided each other's hair, and chased fireflies at dusk. Though Kyra was louder, bolder, and more curious about the world, she always looked up to her older sister. Then came the day the earth shifted. He arrived on a horse blacker than night. His name was Obina, a warrior from the northern hills, known for defeating bandits, calming tribal feuds, and walking with spirits. His presence drew whispers in the market, and children peeped from behind baskets of cassava to catch a glimpse of him. He did not smile. His voice was deep, deliberate. And he was here for a bride. But not just any bride. Obina came with bags of cowries, bolts of fine cloth, jars of foreign spices, and a goat with horns that curled like waves. He sat with Adora's parents under the old mango tree and made his offer clear: he wanted Aduera as his wife. Not Kyra, though many assumed it would be her. Not a chief's daughter. But Aduera, the quiet one with healing hands. Her parents hesitated. But the wealth he laid at their feet was enough to change their lives forever. Enough to rebuild their leaking roof, send Kyra to a city school, and buy more farmland. They told themselves that Obina must see Adora's worth, her soul, her goodness. That he would care for her. That night, Aduera sat outside alone, her fingers digging into the soil. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She only watched the moon rise slowly, as if it too was reluctant to see this union happen. The next morning, there was no wedding. No dancing. No celebration. Just a quiet goodbye. Obina came before the cock's third crow and told Aduera to pack nothing. He led her through the thickets and trees, deeper than anyone in the village ever dared to go. Birds stopped chirping. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. At the edge of the forest, they reached a clearing. In its center stood a hut made of thick wood, bound with ropes of vine and smeared with strange red markings. A small window sat high up the wall, too small to crawl through. No smoke came from the chimney. No footprints surrounded the place. "This is your home now," Obina said. Aduera looked at him, searching his face for kindness, for explanation. "Why?" she asked softly. He did not answer. Instead, he handed her a clay pot of water, a small basket of roasted yams, and a rough mat. Then he said words that chilled her blood: "Do not leave. Do not ask questions. Do not try to run. This is for your safety, and the safety of all." Before she could speak again, he stepped out and bolted the heavy wooden door from the outside. The lock echoed like thunder. The days that followed passed like thick syrup. The light from the tiny window stretched across the hut like a lazy snake, moving from corner to corner but never fully reaching her. She had no mirror, no calendar, no voice to speak to. Only the quiet buzz of insects and the occasional hoot of an owl at night. Food and water came once a day, delivered by a hunched old woman who never spoke a word. She slid a small tray through a slot and disappeared into the trees. Aduera tried to speak to her, tried to ask if this was a mistake, if she knew her family, but the woman only looked at her with clouded eyes, as if her soul had long ago left her body. Aduera tried to understand. Maybe Obina was hiding her from enemies. Maybe he feared spirits. Maybe he had seen a vision that this was the only way to keep her safe. But why no wedding? Why no affection? Why not even a name spoken in kindness? She began to question her own worth. Had she offended the gods? Had she been too quiet, too soft? Was this some punishment dressed in a warrior's armor? When Obina did return, once every few moons, he brought herbs, placed them in the corner, and muttered strange prayers in a language she didn't know. He never touched her. Never stayed long. He never even looked at her fully. He seemed to avoid her eyes. The strangest pain was not the isolation, but the memory of Kyra. Her sister hadn't wept. Hadn't argued. She had only kissed Adora's cheek lightly and said, "Take care," before turning away. There was no warmth in her hug, no trembling in her voice. It was as if Kyra already knew. As if she had made peace with it. Or worse, wanted it. Aduera replayed that moment over and over in her mind, each time noticing a new detail. The way Kyra's fingers trembled, not from sadness, but excitement. The slight smile at the corner of her lips. The way she didn't turn back even once as Obina led Aduera away. Something was wrong. And as the seasons changed outside, and vines began to crawl up the edges of her hut, Adora's confusion began to twist into quiet fear. Her dreams grew stranger. The whispers of the forest at night began to carry her name, soft and sorrowful. She no longer wondered why she was here. She began to wonder what was being hidden from her, and who had helped hide it. Under the same watchful moon that once shone over the village of Umwala, Aduera remained locked in the small, airless hut. The seasons outside continued their silent march, rain came and washed the trees clean, the sun returned and baked the earth dry, and again the skies wept. But inside the hut, nothing changed. The walls, stone on the bottom and dark wood up top, seemed to close in tighter with each passing month. Moss grew slowly between the cracks of the stones. The wooden beams creaked at night like they too resented their job of holding this prison together. The air in the hut was always damp. The floor, made of packed earth, was cold even on warm days. There was no fire. A single narrow window, just wide enough for a breeze but too small for escape, let in the light when the sun was kind. When it wasn't, the shadows ruled. Every day, just after the sun began to rise but before it fully showed its face, the mute old woman arrived. She never knocked or announced herself. Aduera only knew of her coming by the soft sound of clay sliding against stone. A bowl of soup. A gourd of water. Sometimes roasted yam, sometimes boiled plantain. Always enough to survive, never enough to thrive. The old woman never stayed. When Aduera called out to her, she paused, just for a moment, but never answered. Her eyes were milk-colored, her back bent like a bow, her silence absolute. Aduera began to wonder if she were even human. Obina, the man who had brought her here, came only once each moon. He never warned her of his arrival. One morning she would wake to find the door unlocked, and he'd be standing just outside, eyes scanning the trees as if something other than her had his attention. He brought herbs in tightly tied pouches, and he always placed them in the corner near her mat, never handing them to her directly. Then he would walk slowly around the hut, murmuring under his breath words Aduera couldn't understand, his voice low, rhythmic, like a prayer or a curse. Sometimes he lit a candle and let it burn down to nothing before he left. He never asked her how she was. Never looked into her eyes. Never said her name. At first, Aduera tried to speak to him. "Why am I here? Was I cursed? Do my parents know what you've done? Did I do something wrong?" But his silence was harder than stone. After a while, she stopped asking. To keep herself from forgetting who she was, Aduera began to make her own journals. She found a scrap of white cloth tucked into the corner of the hut one day, maybe once part of her arrival bundle, and tore it into small squares. She used charcoal from the remains of one of Obina's burnt candles. With slow strokes, she wrote. Not with the writing of the elders or foreign books, but in symbols only she understood, her own language, her own memory. She drew the shape of her sister's braid, the curve of her mother's smile, the outline of her father's storytelling hands. She marked the passing of days with dots and circles. She recorded dreams, and thoughts, and fears. And as the moons passed, she found that her mind was beginning to stretch in ways it never had before. She could remember every sound the hut made, where the wood creaked when it rained, how the wind tapped the left side during the harmattan. She could feel when the air grew heavier, before a storm. She began to memorize the steps of the old woman outside, counting them by sound, by weight, by distance. And then, the whispers began. At first, she thought they were dreams. Or tricks of a mind too long alone. But they always came at night, and more often during storms. The wind would rise, shaking the vines on the walls, and from between the gusts came words. Soft. Faint. Familiar. Aduera. The voice was always gentle. It never shouted. It never said more than her name. But it was the way it was said. A way only one person ever used. The voice of her sister. She tried to answer once. Kyra. Is it you? Silence followed. Then only the sound of the storm. The next time she heard it, she didn't speak back. She just listened. And it came again. Aduera. It left her trembling. Not from fear, but from confusion. Hope. Regret? She didn't know. But after that, the whispers returned more often. Sometimes, they seemed farther away, like an echo from the mountains. Other times, they were close, so close she turned quickly to the door, expecting someone to be standing there. She began to wonder, was she meant to hear them? Or was someone outside trying to reach her? Trying to tell her something? And if that voice really was her sister's, what did it mean? Her dreams became thick with symbols. A dark lake. A hut floating on air. A rope made of hair. A fire burning without smoke. Faces she couldn't name watching her from behind trees. And always the same ending, her waking up with her hand clenched tightly around one of her charcoal drawings, as if she had reached into the dream and pulled it back with her. Her body, however, was no longer as strong. The hut was small, her diet too simple, and the lack of sun weighed heavily on her bones. Her legs ached more. Her arms grew thinner. But her eyes became sharp as spearheads. Every detail around her mattered now. Every change in air, every creak in the wall. Her hearing became like a hunter's. Her thoughts, once scattered and soft, were now sharp and layered. One night, after a particularly violent storm had passed, she found a mark on the inside wall of the hut, a mark she hadn't made. A line, drawn vertically, clean and dark. Fresh. It hadn't been there the day before. She ran her finger over it and felt its dampness. Someone had been inside. Or someone had reached through. The next day, the old woman didn't come. For the first time in years, no food appeared. No water. Aduera waited. She called out softly, then louder. Nothing. She pounded on the door. Silence. Night came again, and so did the whisper. Aduera. But this time, there was something new. A pause. Then a second voice. Different. Deeper. Not kind. The whisper didn't say her name. It only laughed. Aduera backed into the corner, clutching the last of her cloth notes, her fingers trembling. Something was happening. Something was changing. And for the first time since her exile began, she no longer wondered how long she would be kept in the hut. She wondered if she was meant to survive it. It began just after the rain stopped, when the dampness on the hut walls still glistened like sweat on skin. Aduera sat with her back to the door, weak but awake, her journal cloths laid around her like fallen leaves. She was drawing her sister's eyes for the third time that day when the door creaked open. The light fell across the dirt floor as the old woman stepped inside. This time, she didn't leave the bowl by the threshold. She walked in. She shut the door behind her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Just stood, hands clasped, face as unreadable as ever. Aduera looked up, unsure if this was a dream. Maybe another whisper come to life. Then the woman's cracked lips moved. Your sister fed your silence with her rise. The words dropped like stones in a well. Heavy. Cold. Deep. Adora's hands froze over the cloth. She turned fully toward the old woman, eyes wide. What did you say? But the woman didn't repeat herself. She moved slowly to the far wall, the one marked by the strange vertical line that had appeared weeks ago, and sat. Her legs folded with an eerie grace for someone so aged. For the first time, Aduera noticed the blue beads wrapped tightly around her left wrist, beads of a priestess. Please, Aduera whispered, her voice cracking, tell me what that means. What did you say about my sister? The old woman's pale eyes flicked toward her. Kyra and Obina, she said, voice rough like bark but steady, were lovers long before the marriage talks began. You were never part of the plan. Adora's heart slammed once against her chest. Lovers? Yes. But love was not their only hunger. The old woman reached into the folds of her wrapper and brought out a pouch. She emptied its contents onto the dirt, ash, bits of white chalk, and a black stone shaped like an eye. They wanted power. More than land. More than wealth. Spiritual power. An unshakable bond, sealed by sacrifice. Aduera stared. Her body felt far away, as if her spirit had moved closer to the truth than her flesh could handle. There was a priest, the old woman continued. A shadowed one. Exiled. Dangerous. He told them what to do. Said that for 7 years of ascension, they would need one thing above all. Her voice dropped lower. Aduera leaned in. They needed a pure sister. Not just virgin flesh, but pure of heart. One who trusted them. One who would never suspect betrayal. The word struck like thunder. Aduera stumbled to her feet. No, she breathed. The old woman nodded slowly. Yes. You. The memories came rushing back. The way Kyra had held her the night before her wedding. The way Obina had looked at her, not with hatred but with pity. The way her mother had not resisted, how her father's eyes had remained dry. The silence. The secrecy. The unanswered questions. All of it now shaped into a weapon and driven into her chest. Aduera clutched her stomach and nearly fell to her knees. Why? Why would she, my own blood? They chose you, the old woman said, not unkindly. Because you were quiet. Because you loved them. Because they knew you would not fight them. Not at first. Aduera could barely breathe. All this time, she whispered. All these years. 7, the old woman said. Not more. Not less. If you survive until the end, their bond will be sealed. They will rise. Their bloodline will be blessed. But if you escape before then. She paused. The curse breaks. Aduera lifted her head. What curse? The one tied to their ambition. Their deal was sealed with blood. But the gods, both light and dark, do not allow such pacts to go unbalanced. If the pure one escapes before the 7th year ends, the blessings turn to rot. They will decay from within. Their names will be forgotten. Their children will speak in tongues no one understands. Hope, bitter and fragile, lit up inside Aduera like a spark in dry grass. How long have I been here? The old woman looked at her carefully. Nearly 6 years. Aduera pressed her hands to her face. 1 more year. The old woman nodded. But why are you telling me now? Aduera asked, lowering her hands. Why speak now, after all this time? The old woman closed her eyes for a moment. Because the winds are shifting. The trees have started to speak of unrest. And the whispers you hear, your sister's voice, they are not meant for your ears alone. The spirits know the truth. They are beginning to stir. Aduera stared at her, searching for anything that would make this easier to believe. But deep inside, a quiet part of her whispered that she had known. Known for a long time that this wasn't protection. This was punishment. This was betrayal. What happens if I leave now? She asked. Her voice no longer shook. If I break out? The old woman reached forward and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. Then they fall. But so might you. The curse punishes the impure and protects the innocent. You are still pure, but the world outside may not be kind to what it doesn't understand. Aduera felt the pulse of decision beat in her blood. So much had been taken. Her youth, her family, her freedom. But not her mind. Not her strength. Not yet. I will wait, she said finally, though the rage inside her burned like a torch. But not quietly. Not like before. The old woman smiled, a sad, tired smile that didn't touch her eyes. Then begin preparing. The final year is the most dangerous. They will sense your awakening. They will grow desperate. Aduera looked around the hut, seeing it now not as a prison, but as a battlefield. She would not be silent anymore. And when her time came, she would not just leave. She would rise. Adora's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Now that she knew the truth, the weight of the years spent in silence, in isolation, began to shape into something else. Rage. Betrayal. But also, the raw strength of survival. She wasn't the same girl who had been locked in the hut for all this time. She wasn't the innocent, trusting sister anymore. She was something harder. Stronger. Her first priority was to study the hut. To learn it, its every corner, its every creak and crack. She didn't waste time. She measured every inch, counted every brick of stone, every beam of wood, as if the hut itself were a puzzle she needed to solve. Each day, she focused on the weakness in the walls. The door could be pried open if she had enough strength, but it was reinforced with thick iron bars that Obinna had likely installed himself. The window was too small, and the earth around the hut was too soft to dig through. No, she couldn't rely on brute force alone. She needed to be smarter, quicker. Aduera began to conserve food, small portions of yam, scraps of plantains, and the occasional root the old woman left behind. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for a few days, if she played her cards right. She ate less than she should, saving the rest for when she would need it most. Her body grew thinner, but her muscles tightened in ways she hadn't expected. She was getting stronger, and her movements, once sluggish from isolation, became more deliberate. More purposeful. She stretched daily, keeping her limbs agile and prepared for whatever lay ahead. Then, every night, Aduera listened. She studied the patterns of the storm. The rhythms of the wind. The sound of the old woman's visits. And always, she waited for the whispers. And then, one night, as the wind howled through the cracks in the hut, the voice came again. It was faint at first, barely more than a breath against the storm. But then it grew louder, more insistent. Aduera. Her pulse quickened. She had been waiting for this moment. She closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, guiding her. This time, the whisper wasn't the soft, gentle voice of her sister. No, it was something else. Something stronger. A loose plank, the voice said. Adora's heart skipped a beat. She opened her eyes, searching the walls, the wooden beams, the floor. The whisper hadn't lied. There it was, in the far corner of the hut, a plank that had always seemed slightly out of place. It was loose, held together only by the thinest of nails. No one had ever mentioned it before. Not Obina. Not the old woman. And yet, there it was, a weakness. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the plank. With careful precision, she pried it free, letting it fall with a soft thud against the dirt floor. Beneath it lay the dark, narrow space she had been waiting for. A gap that led out of the hut and into the wild, untamed forest beyond. The air outside was thick with the scent of wet leaves and rain-soaked earth. For a moment, Aduera hesitated. The hut had been her prison for so long, and now it was her refuge. The walls had been her companions, her only protection from the outside world. But no more. She couldn't stay. Not now. Not after everything she had learned. Not after everything that had been taken from her. She gathered what little food she had stored, her fingers brushing the charcoal drawings that represented the last remnants of her life before the hut. Then, she slid through the gap in the wall, slipping silently into the night. The forest welcomed her. The thick canopy above shielded her from the sky, casting everything in shadows. The moonlight barely touched the ground as she moved through the underbrush, every step a calculated effort. The air was cool, the dampness of the earth filling her lungs as she moved deeper into the wild. It had been years since she had been in the forest. Her memories of it were hazy, blurred by the suffocating confinement of the hut. But now, as she moved beneath the familiar trees, a sense of freedom washed over her. It felt as though she were stepping into a world she had forgotten, a world that had been stolen from her. She moved cautiously, keeping low, hiding behind trees and rocks whenever the sound of footsteps or voices drifted through the air. The village wasn't far off, and she knew she had to be careful. If anyone saw her, if anyone recognized her, they would ask questions she couldn't answer. Adora's heart raced as she neared the village. It had changed since she'd been locked away. The once humble huts had been replaced with larger, grander homes. There was a new sense of wealth here, a brightness that didn't belong. The market square, once filled with the smells of fish and open fires, now carried the scent of spices and rich perfumes. She huddled behind a tall tree, her breath shallow as she watched. Then, she saw them. Kyra and Obina. They walked side by side, their heads held high. Kyra was dressed in flowing robes of gold, her hair braided intricately, catching the light with every step. She wore jewelry that sparkled like stars. A crown of gold rested upon her head, and beside her, Obina walked proudly. His presence was commanding, he wore the cloak of a leader now, the mark of someone who had risen in power. Adora's stomach twisted. The pain came first, sharp and bitter. She watched them as they strolled through the village square, laughing together. Their love, once hidden, was now paraded openly. They were royalty now. They had the life Aduera had once imagined for herself, a life of respect, power, and wealth. And she had been left behind. Kyra's laughter rang in Adora's ears, but it was different now. It was hollow. It was empty. The sister she had once loved and trusted was nothing more than a shadow of the girl Aduera had known. A girl who had betrayed her. A girl who had stolen her future. Adora's fingers curled into fists, her nails digging into her palms. The rage that had been building inside her for years now spilled over. Kyra had taken everything, her life, her freedom, her innocence, and for what? Power? Glory? But in that moment, something shifted. She was no longer the girl who had been locked in a hut, waiting for the world to change. She wasn't the helpless sister who had trusted too easily. She was Aduera, and the world had underestimated her. Kyra had stolen her life, but she hadn't stolen her spirit. Aduera straightened, stepping out from behind the tree, her eyes fixed on her sister and Obina. She would not let them live in the world they had created. Not without paying for what they had done. The time for waiting was over. Now, it was time for Aduera to rise. The journey to the sacred shrine was long, and Adora's feet were sore, but she pushed through the pain. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting shifting shadows on the path ahead, guiding her steps. Her mind was filled with the weight of her mission, to find the blind priestess who had once been a part of her life, whose teachings had been whispered about in the village long before Aduera had been locked away. It felt as if the earth beneath her feet was leading her to an old truth she had forgotten. She passed through the dense forest, the trees towering above her like silent guardians. Her movements were swift, but she never let her guard down. There were dangers out here, beasts that roamed the hills, rumors of spirits that lingered near the sacred places. But none of it mattered now. Aduera had long since learned how to survive. As she climbed the final stretch toward the shrine, the air grew thick with the scent of incense and flowers. The sacred shrine, nestled atop the highest hill, was a place of peace and power. The stone structure was simple but majestic, its entrance framed by ancient carvings of gods and spirits. The flickering light of oil lamps illuminated the stone courtyard, where a stone basin caught the rainwater. Aduera approached the shrine with a quiet reverence, knowing that the priestess was there, waiting for her. The priestess was seated at the altar, her face hidden in shadows. She had always been a figure of mystery in Adora's memory, blind, but with eyes that seemed to see everything. The blind priestess had been a guardian of the village's spiritual well-being, revered for her wisdom, and yet Aduera had never fully understood the depths of her knowledge. As Aduera stepped into the shrine, the priestess turned toward her, her pale face streaked with tears. Despite her blindness, the priestess knew she was there. "Aduera," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "It has been too long. You should not have lived, but here you are." Adora's heart tightened at the words. "I survived," she said, her voice shaking. "I escaped. I'm here to understand why." The priestess closed her eyes and began to weep, her tears falling onto her hands, which rested on the stone altar. "You were meant to die in silence. Your suffering was part of a greater ritual. Kyra. Obina, they used you." Aduera took a step closer, her voice heavy with the need for answers. "Please. Tell me everything. I need to know the truth." The priestess nodded slowly, her hands trembling as she spoke. "The ritual that they began, your sister and Obina, was one of great sacrifice. But it was never meant to be for them. It was meant for something greater. Your life was the price for the power they sought. They wanted to rise, to gain spiritual strength. But the sacrifice, the purity of your spirit, could only be sustained for 7 years. You were to remain locked away, untouched, silent, all so that your energy could feed Kyra's rise. Your stillness was to nourish her, to make her more than human." Adora's breath caught in her chest. She had known something dark had been at play, but hearing it spoken aloud, the full horror of it settled deep within her. "They wanted to use me. To feed off me," she whispered, the weight of her own suffering finally crashing down on her. "But I wasn't supposed to escape. Was I?" "No," the priestess said, shaking her head. "You were to stay pure. Silent. Their power would grow as you rotted in that hut. And when the 7 years ended, Kyra would become a force, invincible. But the ritual only works if the sacrifice doesn't break. If you escaped early, the curse would reverse, and everything would fall apart. The energy you gave her would return to you, and everything would unravel." Aduera struggled to understand. "If I escaped, everything would fall apart." "Yes," the priestess said, her voice low and mournful. "The gods do not forgive broken pacts. And neither does the earth. The ritual was delicate, balanced by time. The moment you broke free, Kyra's rise began to wither. The world began to change, just as it is now. Their ambition will not hold. They are already starting to feel the weight of what they have done. Aduera clenched her fists, the rage building in her chest. So this is how it ends. My escape, my suffering, will destroy them. Not only them, the priestess said softly. The curse will spread, Aduera. It will affect their bloodline, their future. The ones they have brought into this world with their dark ambitions will suffer as well. Aduera fell silent, her thoughts swirling. She could feel the weight of the years of silence, the years of pain, lifting as she began to understand the full scope of what had happened. But there was no time to waste on grief. Not now. She had come here for a reason, to seek not just the truth, but a way to fight back. What can I do? She asked. How do I break the spell for good? The priestess extended her hand, a small, intricately woven charm resting in her palm. The charm was made from dried herbs, bound together by thread and wrapped in a circle of red cloth. This charm, the priestess explained, is for protection. It will shield you from the curse's full force. The gods will not be able to touch you while you carry it. Aduera took the charm, feeling its weight in her hands. It was light, but the power it carried seemed immense. Thank you, she whispered. But this won't be enough. I need to return, not just to take revenge. I need to break the spell. The priestess smiled sadly. You have more strength than you know, Aduera. Your survival is your victory, but your spirit is stronger than you think. If you want to break the curse completely, you must confront Kyra and Obina. You must expose their lie to the world. Only then will the bond between them be shattered. Aduera stood tall, the charm held tightly in her hand. I swear I will return. Not just for revenge, but to break this spell forever. I will make sure the world knows the truth. The priestess nodded slowly. The path ahead is dangerous, but you are no longer the girl who was locked away. You are a force of your own now, Aduera. A force of nature. Aduera took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle around her like armor. The time for silence was over. The time for waiting was over. She would return to the village, and this time, she would not be a prisoner. This time, she would be the one to tear down the lies. The world would hear her voice. The air was thick with excitement, the kind of anticipation that only came when the village prepared for a grand celebration. The streets were lined with colorful banners, and the scent of roasted meat and sweetened fruits filled the air. Music played, and people danced in the sunlight, their voices echoing in joyful song. It was the festival of prosperity, a celebration of the good fortune brought by Obina and Kyra, the couple whose rise to power had been the talk of the village for years. Everyone spoke of their fortune, their beauty, their endless wealth. To the villagers, they were the symbols of success. Aduera stood on the outskirts of the crowd, blending in with the shadows. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her calm. She had spent too many years in isolation, too many nights in the dark, planning for this very moment. She had prepared herself for the confrontation, had steeled herself for the pain and the rage that would surely flood her as she exposed the truth. She had once been a part of this community, loved and cared for. She had once believed in the purity of family, the warmth of shared bonds. But now, she had come to understand the darkness that ran through the heart of her family. Her sister, Kyra, and Obina had betrayed her, sacrificed her, and twisted her existence into a tool for their own rise. Today, that would end. Clad in a simple but dark cloak, Aduera blended into the crowd, her face hidden from view. She watched as Obina and Kyra stood at the center of the celebration, their faces glowing with pride. Kyra, radiant in gold, clung to Obina's side, her smile as false as the affection she had once shown Aduera. The villagers surrounded them, chanting their names, calling them the bringers of prosperity, the guardians of wealth. It was all a lie, every single word. Adora's hand tightened around the charm given to her by the priestess. It was time. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, the crowd parting as her dark cloak swept the ground behind her. The whispers began immediately, some turned in curiosity, others in confusion, but none could look away. At the height of the festivities, just as the music reached a crescendo, Aduera threw back her hood, revealing her face to the stunned crowd. A collective gasp rippled through the villagers, like a wave crashing against the shore. Silence fell over the area, broken only by the sounds of Adora's footsteps as she walked forward, her eyes locked onto the faces of the two people who had caused her so much pain. Obina's face went ashen, his lips parted in shock. His eyes flickered between Aduera and the crowd, unsure of what to do. His power had always been in his silence, his control over the people. But now, his grip was slipping. Kyra, too, froze, her body trembling as she met Adora's gaze. For a moment, her usual bravado faltered, revealing the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. She took a step back, as if to retreat, but the crowd was too thick, the attention too intense. Aduera raised her voice, strong and clear, carrying across the square. "You all have been deceived," she said, her words slicing through the tension in the air. "This is not a tale of prosperity, of good fortune. It is a story of betrayal, of greed, and of silence." The crowd grew still, their eyes darting between her and the two figures at the center of the celebration. Adora's heart thudded in her chest, but she pressed on. "I am Aduera. I am the sister who was locked away for 7 years. My body, my spirit, were used to feed the rise of these two. Obina, my husband, and Kyra, my sister. They wanted power. They wanted wealth. They wanted to be gods." A murmur spread through the crowd as the villagers processed the words. They had known something had been strange about the couple's rise, but no one had ever dared to speak out. Now, the truth was laid bare before them, and they were left to grapple with it. Aduera turned her gaze to Kyra. "You betrayed me," she continued, her voice shaking with a mix of sorrow and fury. "You sold me out to Obina. You let me rot in a hut for years, all while you wore gold and enjoyed the fruits of my suffering." Kyra took a step back, her hands trembling at her sides. "Aduera, stop this," she said, her voice weak. "You don't understand." "I understand enough," Aduera interrupted. "I understand that while I was locked away, you lived a lie. You used my silence, my suffering, to make yourself more than what you were. And now you stand here, pretending to be a goddess. But you are nothing but a thief, Kyra. You stole my life." The crowd was silent now, but Aduera could feel their eyes on her. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their confusion, and their disbelief. But she could not stop now. She had waited too long. She had suffered too much. "The old woman, the mute who brought me food, she knew what you did. The priestess, the one who helped me escape, she knows too," Aduera continued. "And now you will be exposed for what you truly are. The curse you cast on me, Kyra, will be your undoing." Kyra's face twisted in anger, her eyes flashing with defiance. "You're lying," she spat. "This is all a lie. You think I would hurt you like that? You think I would betray my own blood for power?" But before Aduera could answer, Kyra's voice broke into an unholy scream, a sound that sent shivers through the crowd. It was as if her entire being had shattered in that moment, her control slipping entirely. She fell to her knees, clutching her throat as though something was choking her from within. Her skin paled, and she began to convulse. Obina rushed to her side, his face stricken with panic. "Kyra! Kyra, what's happening?" he shouted, but Kyra's screams only grew louder, her body writhing in pain. The crowd stood frozen, not knowing whether to help or to run, their eyes wide with fear. Aduera stood tall, watching as Kyra writhed in the dirt, her once gilded figure reduced to something unrecognizable. The priestess's words echoed in Adora's mind, "If the offering escapes early, everything reverses." And that's what was happening now. The power that Kyra had stolen from her was beginning to unravel. The balance had been broken, and the curse had returned to its true source. Aduera turned to face the crowd once more. "This is the truth," she said, her voice steady. "The curse is undone. Kyra's rise is over. And the village will no longer be deceived by these false gods." With that, she turned and walked away, the crowd parting before her like water, leaving Obina and Kyra in the midst of their chaos. Adora's heart raced, but she did not stop. She had done what she came to do. She had spoken the truth. Kyra's screams echoed through the crowd as she collapsed to the ground, her body shaking violently. The beauty that had once defined her, the glow of wealth and power that had radiated from her every step, began to fade before the eyes of the entire village. Her skin, once smooth and flawless, now appeared dull and lifeless. Her golden garments, once pristine, now looked out of place, tarnished by the curse that had been broken. The once vibrant woman who had been the center of attention at every festival, every gathering, now lay in the dirt, her body twisted with pain. Her once perfect smile, so carefully crafted for the public, had vanished, leaving only a grotesque mask of suffering. The transformation was not just physical, it was as if the very essence of her power had evaporated, leaving her a hollow shell of the person she had once been. Obina, standing beside her, stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just unfolded. The shock of seeing Kyra in such a state left him frozen. But as the reality of the situation began to sink in, he turned, his eyes wide with terror, and tried to flee. However, his body refused to cooperate. His legs buckled beneath him, and his arms hung uselessly at his sides. It was as though invisible chains had wrapped around him, paralyzing him where he stood. His attempts to move were futile. Panic surged within him, but his body remained stiff, caught in the grip of the curse's final wrath. The air grew heavy with the sound of distant thunder, and dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The gods were angry. The storm was their punishment, a sign that their wrath had been stirred by the breaking of the curse. The villagers, once so eager to celebrate Obina and Kyra's false prosperity, now watched in stunned silence as the couple's downfall unfolded before them. Aduera stood in the center of the village, her expression unflinching. Her heart still raced, but there was no triumph in her eyes, only a quiet resolve. The anger and pain that had fueled her escape, her journey to reveal the truth, had not yet subsided. But as she watched Kyra crumble before her, something in her heart softened. She had come for justice, but now that justice was here, it felt like nothing more than a painful necessity. The villagers began to murmur, their voices rising in confusion and regret. They had celebrated Obina and Kyra, believed their rise to power was a blessing. Now, they could see the truth for what it was, the rise of evil, the exploitation of a sister's suffering, and the manipulation of a community's trust. Shame spread through the crowd like a disease, and the once celebrated couple was now the object of scorn. The village chief, an elderly man who had always held the power to guide the people, stepped forward. His face was stern, but there was a deep sadness in his eyes. He had been one of the first to praise Obina and Kyra, to acknowledge their supposed blessings. But now, in the wake of Adora's revelation, he saw the depth of their deception. The chief's voice boomed across the square. "Remove their names," he commanded, his tone final and unwavering. "Obina and Kyra are no longer worthy of the honors we once bestowed upon them. Their names will be erased from every scroll, every song, every story. We will forget them as they have forgotten the truth." The villagers nodded in agreement, some with tears in their eyes, others with a mix of shame and guilt. It was clear that they had been complicit in the lies, but it was also clear that they were ready to atone. The fall of the once powerful couple had become a lesson in humility, in the importance of truth over false appearances. As Kyra's sobs filled the air, she lifted her head from the dirt, her eyes locking with Adora's. There was no longer any pretense in her gaze, only raw desperation. She crawled toward her sister, her movements weak and unsteady. "Aduera, please, please," she begged, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was scared, and I thought I could fix everything. I I was wrong. Please forgive me. Adora's heart tightened at the sight of her sister, so broken, so far removed from the woman who had once been her closest companion. But the words she had longed to say, those words of forgiveness, did not come. Instead, Aduera remained silent, watching as Kyra struggled toward her, the pride that had once defined her shattered beyond repair. Kyra reached out, her hands trembling, and when she was just a few feet away, she stopped, as if the weight of what she was about to say had finally caught up with her. I was wrong, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I buried you alive. I thought I could save us both, but I ruined everything. Tears flowed down her face as she looked up at Aduera. Please, let me make it right. Adora's gaze softened, but her expression remained firm. She took a step forward, her body moving with purpose. She knelt down beside her sister, her eyes meeting Kyra's. The years of isolation, of pain, and of betrayal had not been erased by the tears that now stained Kyra's cheeks. Aduera had waited too long for this moment to allow herself to be swayed by the desperation in her sister's voice. You were my sister, Aduera whispered, her voice steady but full of sorrow. You buried me alive. And now, I have lived to see you fall. Her eyes hardened, and the weight of her words hung heavy between them. There is no forgiveness for this. Not from me. Kyra's face crumpled, the hope she had clung to vanishing in an instant. She collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably, her body racked with grief. Aduera stood up, the finality of the moment settling deep within her. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to do. Without another word, Aduera turned and walked away, her step steady and unwavering. The crowd parted before her, their eyes filled with awe and uncertainty. Aduera had done what she had set out to do, she had exposed the truth, had brought an end to the deception that had festered in the heart of her family. But as she walked away, she did not look back. The past was over. And with it, the power that Kyra and Obina had once held was gone forever. Aduera didn't stay in the village after the confrontation. The shadows of her past clung to her, but she knew that staying would only trap her in a life that no longer belonged to her. With each step, the weight of the years in the hut seemed to lift, but there was no sense of triumph in her heart, only a quiet determination to leave it all behind. The village had given her the pain, but it would never hold her again. She walked into the forest, letting the dense canopy of trees swallow her up. The world outside had changed since she had been locked away, but it felt as though the forest was the only place where she could truly breathe. The air was cooler here, fresher, and each rustling of the leaves seemed to carry away the weight of her memories. It was in the stillness of the forest that Aduera found her peace. She traveled for days, her journey led not by a map, but by something deeper, a sense of purpose that had been awakened within her when she escaped the hut. Eventually, she arrived at a small village nestled within the hills, far from the sights and sounds of her past. The village was quiet, its people living simple lives, but there was a strength here that Aduera could feel immediately. It was a village of healers, women who had escaped bad marriages, abusive relationships, and cruel fates. These were women who had found refuge in one another, and Aduera knew that she had found her place among them. The women of the village welcomed Aduera with open arms. They did not see her as a victim, but as one of their own, someone who had survived the worst of circumstances and emerged stronger for it. Aduera began to heal others, using her newfound knowledge of herbs, potions, and spiritual rituals to ease the pain of those who sought her help. But it was not just their physical ailments she healed. Aduera taught them how to be strong, how to resist the pull of oppressive forces, and how to trust in their own inner power. Word of Adora's abilities spread quickly, not just within the village, but to neighboring lands. People traveled from far and wide to seek her wisdom, and soon her name was known throughout the region, not as the sister who had been locked away, but as a spirit warrior. She had become a symbol of resilience, of survival, of a woman who had faced unspeakable horrors and turned them into strength. Aduera no longer carried the weight of her past, instead, she had transformed it into something powerful. Yet, even with all her newfound strength, Aduera was not free of the whispers. At night, when the village was quiet and the moon hung low in the sky, Aduera would still hear them. The whispers had always been there, first the eerie, unearthly voices that haunted the hut, and then the voice of her sister, calling her in her dreams. But now, the whispers were different. They were no longer filled with the darkness of betrayal and pain. They had softened, becoming gentle and peaceful, like the wind that rustled through the trees at dusk. Aduera would lie awake, listening to the whispers, and in those moments, she would remember the girl she once was, the girl who had been trapped in that small, dark hut. She would think of the pain she had endured, the betrayal she had suffered, and the journey that had led her here. But the whispers told her that her work was not done. They reminded her that there were still others out there, others who were still locked away in their own versions of huts, waiting for someone to come and save them. One evening, as she sat beneath a great oak tree, Aduera took out the journal she had kept during her time in the hut. The pages were tattered, the ink faded, but the memories they contained were still sharp in her mind. She had written in secret, marking the days as they passed, recording the whispers that had haunted her, and drawing pictures of her dreams and hopes for the future. Now, sitting in the quiet of the forest, Aduera knew it was time to lay those memories to rest. She buried the journal deep beneath the tree, planting seeds of wildflowers around it. As the wind rustled through the leaves, it felt as though the earth itself was accepting her past, allowing it to grow into something new. Aduera's eyes glistened with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release. The weight of her old life, the burden of her past, was finally gone. The night grew colder, and the stars sparkled overhead, a reminder of the vastness of the world around her. Aduera rose to her feet, a sense of purpose settling in her chest. She had come so far, so much had changed, and yet, something inside of her knew that there was still more to do. As the wind whispered once more, Aduera stood tall, her back straight, her heart steady. The whispers she had heard for so long had led her here. And now, they had given her one final message: there was another girl, another soul trapped in a hut, another life waiting to be saved. Aduera did not hesitate. She knew the path she must take. Her journey was not over. With the strength of the women she had healed, with the lessons she had learned, Aduera would go on. She would find the next girl, and the next, until there were no more to save. Her life, which had once been defined by pain and betrayal, would now be defined by hope and freedom. The wind whispered its blessing as Aduera walked away from the village, her heart full of purpose and resolve. She was no longer the victim of her past. She was the savior of others, a spirit warrior with the power to change the world. And as she walked into the night, the whispers faded, replaced by the sound of her own footsteps, strong, confident, and unstoppable.